What wave of startups do you see emerging in the future? Building things is getting faster and faster. Where's the room for like new startups to emerge?
What's different now with startups? And I think the answer is...
So Annie, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So you're CVP of Ecosystems and you help startups with Azure.
Yeah.
So I want to talk to you about startups in the age of AI. In your opinion, how is like the building a startup changing?
I actually started a company back in 2009. I was part of the founding team of an early stage startup. And back then, we were racking our own servers. So this was before the cloud, right? We had to actually hire, an in-house IT team pretty early on in our startup journey. And so I've thought a lot about mistakes we made and learnings from that experience. And would that have changed when it comes to AI?
Yeah.
And I think my reflections from that are that, some of the challenges that we faced and the maybe mistakes that we made were things like trying to build too many products at the same time and not narrowly focusing on one really acute problem and nailing that before you build others, or trying to scale too quickly before we actually needed to. And so canonical advice around do things that don't scale, we didn't follow that advice. And so I think that, at the end of the day, AI is really just a technology, right? It's going to allow you to solve problems differently. It's going to allow you to really build much more quickly and actually like really condense the discovery, the idea to validation, so that when you actually go invest real engineers in real code, you have a lot more ideas as to whether it's going to work or not. But at the end of the day, it's just technology. And so I think the basics still really, at the end of the day, the fundamentals are what matter most. Find an acute problem that you feel like you can solve better than any alternative in the market. And then if you do that incredibly well, you'll find a way to, get distribution through new channels. You'll find a way to monetize, and all else follows. So I think the fundamentals are still the most important. What I think is changing is, what you can build and how you can solve those problems. But then also I think you're getting at the how you actually build the startup, and that's where vibe coding platforms and AI-driven products across every discipline I think are allowing startups to move much faster with much smaller teams.
That makes sense. Fundamentals are the same, like first principles, solve the problem the right way, people will like it, they will buy for it, and you go on from there. But have you noticed any changes in terms of like the startups that are going to be emerging now? Because for like with vibe coding, you kind of like basically anyone can have a startup on the application layer where you have interface that connects out at multiple parties or something. And from a reasoning or logic perspective, we have AI LLMs can be leveraged to reason over things. So a lot of the startups in the early days where you were building this proprietary technology to be able to do that thing. So with these things already being taken care of through like, the vibe coding platforms and LLMs and the evolving AI technology, what wave of startups do you see emerging in the future that will be like the unicorns?
I think maybe looking backwards a little bit, we were just talking about what wave, are we in the early innings or the mid innings? But, I think the first wave, maybe call it 2022, when ChatGPT had its moment, was really at the infrastructure layer with the LLMs themselves. And you saw the frontier firms like, OpenAI, obviously they came out with an application, but it was really built on their model. So I think that was sort of the first wave, was more at the kind of model infrastructure layer. And then kind of the next phase we saw was a boom in tooling and developer tooling and, the picks and shovels. And those two are still incredibly important, but I think we're in the application layer moment, and we're certainly in the era of agents. And I think what we're seeing, and again, we just kind of chatted a little bit about this, but you think about departmental, horizontal use cases, and then you think about vertical, and then you think about consumer. And I think on the departmental, really coding and software engineering is really the only discipline that I think is truly, adopted the technology at a rate that's higher than, maybe other disciplines, right? And you started to see a little bit in customer support, but I think it's a clear use case, a clear product market fit in coding. So I think the next wave are going to be, how do we figure out the, agentic coding moment for marketing and for outbound sales and for HR. And so that's sort of one vector. I think another is, on the vertical side, you're also seeing very successful folks like Harvey, where they've picked a legal vertical or professional services or healthcare and really gone down that angle. So I think you'll start to see, some unicorns that come out of the vertical. And then there's still the whole consumer. What is going to be the personal assistant? What's going to be the agent that comes out? Is it Manus? Is it, what is the consumer? Is it Copilot? Right? What's the consumer product going to become more of the kind of day-to-day agent for consumers? So that's kind of how I see the next, couple of years playing out.
Right. But you mentioned the vertical side quite heavily for like the next wave of startups. But one perspective I have is that, Copilot is able to do everything, and every organization is already using a Microsoft suite. So they already have 365, and Copilot is a layer on top. Now we have agents on top.
Yeah.
When you're going to have agents just within Copilot, where's the room for like new startups to emerge from that perspective? Because everything is already being taken care of by like their fundamental platforms that they have in the workspace.
Yeah, I think there's maybe two aspects to this. I think one is that we are actually creating new markets that didn't exist before, right? There wasn't an agentic coding market previously. And so I think these markets are so big that there's room for lots of players. And so yes, Microsoft has, incredible technology and will definitely have products and solutions across many different areas. And yet at the same time, there are probably areas that we are not going to necessarily be deep domain experts in. And that's where I think startups have an incredible advantage because they can go really deep. They can start narrow, they can go deep, they can really embed themselves into the workflows, and then there's like really great partnership opportunities between Microsoft and startups. So I think that's one piece, is just the markets are actually so big, right? And I think the second is, there's a lot of talk of what's going to happen with current jobs. And when I think as a product person, my whole career has been spent with endless backlogs that we never have like the time or the resources to get to. And so I just think we're going to actually there's now going to be the ability to just do so much more that we couldn't do before, versus thinking about let's do, the same amount with fewer people. I think that it's probably going to end far more in we're now able to do use cases that we never could do before because they always just landed below the line from a backlog perspective. So to that point, there's always going to be things that, just that Microsoft won't be able to get to that a startup can play in. So I think it's definitely one of those. I think the markets are big enough, and the use cases that we're going after that we now that we couldn't before means that there's a way for both startups and companies like Microsoft to coexist.
Okay, makes sense. And then let's say there's a vertical that Microsoft is not serving, for example, and that's an opportunity for startups to come in.
Absolutely.
And then let's say that multiple people are now playing for that market share, solving the problem. How do businesses or startups now differentiate themselves? Because again, building things is getting faster and faster. And then even your backlogs as a product, you can just you can do prioritization. You can leverage customer sentiments through agentic models, use that to develop your product roadmap and then execute that at scale. How do startups think about building their moat for long-term sustainability?
Yeah. I mean, I think this just goes back to sort of the question before on what's different now with startups. And I think the answer is nothing, in the sense of the fundamentals still exist, which is you need to be building a product that, solves a problem in a way that somehow is unique enough. And that can be, your implementation of it. It can be a data moat. It can be distribution. It can be, there's lots of different moats you could create. But I think that that's always been kind of a fundamental that needs to be there. But one thing I would also add, so as part of my role, we invest a lot in startups, and the Microsoft for Startups program rolls into me, and as part of my org, and we have a program called Pegasus, and Pegasus actually matches B2B startups that are in different verticals, and we match them with enterprise customers that are within the Microsoft customers. And so we're actually able to, kind of back to your question on where can the startups fit in, we actually think this is a really important role for startups to play in our ability to help enterprise customers, because they're looking for, I want cutting edge companies that are at the, moving fast, but I need help vetting what are the best startups out there for this specific use case. And so what we do is we work with the startups, we deeply understand their products, what problems they're solving, how they're solving it, and then we go and we can work with our large customers to say, hey, you're trying to solve a problem in this domain. Here's a great startup that's part of our program. So I do think there's a way where you sort of can kind of coexist between large enterprises and startups.
I love it. I need to look into this program for my own startup.
Absolutely. We would love to follow up on that.
Well, speaking of investing and also being an SF, what's your take on Bootstrap versus VC? And it's a typical question everyone asks, but has it changed now with AI layer, or is it going to still stay the same like we've talked about building a startup? Fundamentally the same. I think it's really just depends on what type of company you're building, right? So of course, if you are building some sort of specialized LLM, foundational model, you're going to need a lot of compute, and therefore it's going to be very capital intensive before you have the ability to, get customers. I think if you're building at the application layer, ideally you create a product that's so valuable, people are willing to pay for it, you find a way to monetize, and you can, figure out how to monetize
monetize against the compute costs such that you could potentially bootstrap successfully. And I think we're seeing startups, plenty of startups do that. So I don't think it's an either or. I think it's much more, the answer really comes down to what type of product are you building? How capital intensive is it prior to when you can, find a way to monetize? And if that time period is long, then you need to think about getting capital. And if that time period is short, the faster that you can find product market fit and get customers, then, I think you can probably look more towards bootstrap option.
Okay, makes sense. And then as the models are getting smaller and smarter, and I wouldn't be surprised if it just becomes part of a computer chip like Microsoft does new Surface computers where you have, LLMs within the hardware. You don't need to resources for cloud. Do you see rise of more desktop applications in the future because of that? For the past 10, 15 years, all major startups have been just on the cloud, web-based. But do you see rise of desktop applications, startups, just so that they can function right on those LLM models that's embedded within the hardware?
I think that what you're hitting at is maybe the next category shift, right? Which is most of the, sort of most popular products so far have come at the software layer. And I think the kind of next wave we're going to see is going to be more in hardware, and whether that's desktop computer, whether that's some sort of personal device. People talk about glasses as one modality. People talk about earpieces as one modality. Right. I think the modality is yet to be determined on what's the next kind of personal computing platform that people will want to interact with, sort of have an AI assistant with them at all times. But I think that we are certainly coming up now to the next phase of, software will continue, but I think the next kind of breakthroughs will probably come more on the hardware side.
Okay. Daft Punk helmets for everyone.
Yeah, exactly.
You got an air purifier, you got the AR VR screen, you're having notifications.
Yes.
Everything is going over there.
What do you think the modality, will be in terms of consumer adoption?
So I've been noticing that the way we interact with technology, voice never picked up in the previous decade, but now it's picking up. And the reason is our input to the technology is voice, which makes sense. We're faster to communicate and we can express more freely with voice. But the output is still it's better to have a visual, some kind of graphic user interface, so same as before. So I think we're seeing now where we our input is more voice and the output is some screen based along with the voice, multimodal output, but voice as input. So that's my thesis where some of the things would go, and everyone loves using Copilot voice, which is great because again, it attests to that thesis where talking to AI is a lot better. But I feel the output from the AI as a voice is still so slow because it's going to go through sentence structure and all that stuff. We're not going to be give me an answer in 3 bullet points. It's still going to be here's the answer in 3 bullet points type of stuff, unless your prompt is very meticulous to get over that.
Right.
So I see a layer where we just interact with it and we have some kind of display, be it, the glasses of some kind, but we have an audio visual sort of output format.
Yep. I'm a big runner, and so on my runs in the morning, people must think I'm a little weird because I run and I'm talking to Copilot on my runs. I'm often brainstorming or asking it to work through a problem with me. Just kind of talking to Copilot. And it's become so, to your point, it's so natural as a medium, right? Where I talk to other people on the phone. Why can't I just talk to Copilot? So I'm with you on the kind of voice to machine as one of the next modalities.
That's funny because I was at the gym the other day. There was no one else in the gym, and I had to solve a problem. Just wanted a brainstorm something, so I just used a Copilot voice just to be brainstorm that idea. And I was if someone walks in here, they'll think I'm so weird. I'm just talking this very ridiculous questions to someone and just getting an answer for.
Exactly.
But yeah, I never believed it. I mean, I tried playing with the voice, when Alexa and all those products came along, but they just never picked up. But I feel now, voice is input. It's just era. It's going to be the era to shine. Which brings me to my next question. So if you were to 2009 again, and you're going to build a startup, what kind of industry, sector, modality, how would you approach it?
Yeah. I mean, I think we touched a little bit on this, but I think where startups really have a competitive advantage is picking sort of a narrow, to start, picking a narrow, often vertical, where either they themselves have a background. So I actually do have a legal background. So they, have worked in an industry and understand the day-to-day workflows and understand the pain that exists with existing software, and they can bring that domain expertise to really solve a problem better than someone who sees it from the outside. So I think I would start very narrow in an industry that I know well and that I personally or the founding team has unique insights into how the like real operations from a day-to-day work, and figure out how now can I use this technology to solve problems that I couldn't have previously. So it's sort of a combination of like deeply understanding the pain, and then now understanding the technology and how can it solve the problem in a way that previously would never have been possible. So that's one piece. I think the second is, what we're seeing with large enterprise customers, and we're fortunate enough to have, some of the largest in the world running on Microsoft, is that with the proliferation of AI and agents and, in organizations, compliance and security and governance is becoming so important.
Yeah.
And so again, kind of with the Microsoft for Startups program, the founders in our program are all built on Azure. And so we're sort of from day one making sure that they're secure and they have the foundation to scale into the enterprise. And so to your question, I would not only pick, sort of a vertical where I felt like I had a domain expertise, but I'd also build it on a platform from day one, like Azure. Or another, where I felt like I knew, I could sell into the enterprise in the future because I was built on that foundation.
Smart, thinking long term. It comes from experience.
It does, yes.
And then how would you approach like building a founding team? I mean, you have all the agents at your disposal. So how would you start with like your founding team? What things would you be like, I'm going to leverage an agent or AI platform for, versus I need humans for this sort of tasks? Let's just say legal kind of tech somewhere there.
I mean, I think the beauty of this technology is, I think as a team of one, you can get something that's viable that you can at least test with customers. And, even get them using a real product. Now you sort of have to go into it knowing that the product isn't going to scale and it's not necessarily fully production ready. But I think you can get pretty far with a team of one, really focused on building the product, the interface, how does it work, getting feedback. And then as you start to feel like, okay, now I've actually have an idea of what's gonna work. Now I might bring in some full-time, experts in this particular coding language to make sure that my application can scale and it, it's secure and that the code was written really, really well, right? And look, these coding, vibe coding platforms are getting more and more mature and starting to be able to do that as well. So, maybe even it would be a lot longer before you'd need to bring in folks. But I think you can get pretty far these days with, just yourself and an idea and continuous iteration.
I love it. Even with all the experience and everything, you're going to start just solo and leverage the platforms to see how far you can go and then bring on the team. Yeah,
I mean, I think, again, the biggest cost you have in an organization is going to be mostly people. Now it's people and compute, especially engineers, right? And so when I was building a startup, if we spent a couple months on a feature just to find out there was no product market fit or didn't actually solve a problem or didn't solve the problem well, that was, really detrimental to the company. And so I think you can just compress the timeline of figuring out and getting that feedback around whether something's working or not, which means that when you actually do go invest the real time and the real money in the resources, you can be that much more certain. It just reduces your risk that you're going to, write throwaway code. And startups all about time, right? It's just how fast can I move and how fast can I get something into the hands of customers that works. And so getting that feedback loop tighter and tighter and reducing that cycle time is awesome.
Makes sense. And I'm going to jump back to what we're discussing, pre-shoot. We were talking about job displacement. My theory is that the number of jobs being created, they're going to be new jobs created because of the new job functions, roles, and how agents evolve. But the rate at which the new jobs will be created is going to be far less than the rate at which jobs will be automated out with the agents, just the way how fast technology is moving. And also there's a gap between the new jobs being created. People need those skills to be able to execute those jobs, whatever they might be. How do people rescale themselves to be able to bridge that gap or at least overcome that fear that's everywhere now?
I tend to think that the full replacement is less likely than it is being replaced by someone who does the job with AI, right? And again, if you look back on sort of previous paradigm shifts when we went from, into the PC era and, you think about something like Excel, a Microsoft product that's been around for quite some time, but before that it was, pen and paper. And so it was, the job still had to get done. It's just the way we did the job was now through, software. And so people who didn't learn the software and were sort of stuck in their way of using pen and paper, they were out of a job. And so I think it's very similar, right? The job itself still needs to happen, but the how, I think, is the piece that's changing. And so I think the advice for most people is to be really proactive around getting your hands dirty, playing around with all the latest and greatest, tools that are coming out, experimenting, even if it's outside of your domain. Here we're talking about about coding tools, even if I was in marketing or I was in sales, understanding how the technology works by using the products that are out there, like a vibe coding tool, to create a game for myself or to create the app that I've always wanted to create that no one would create for me. You can translate that you have the art of the possible to then go into your job to understand how to think about using AI in your particular role. So I think that's one piece, is just, knowing the mentality of it's going to be humans doing the job with AI for the most part. Then your job is to figure out, how do I become that human with the AI? And I think the only way you do that is by doing and by making and by creating. And every time there's a new product that comes out in the market, you get your hands on it, you test it, you see what you like. So that would be my advice for folks.
So how are you getting your hands dirty?
I read a lot of Twitter, probably too much, and then I see something, a new model was just released yesterday, a new, agent, consumer agent, it was just released, a new coding tool, and I, whenever I'm done with my meetings, I fire it up and play around with it and sort of test the limits. And then, I kind of have a couple use cases in my own personal life. It's like I have 2 young kids. Managing my family life, it's challenging. And so I have my own personal family productivity tool. And so every time there's one of these new products, I test out the same use case, because I'm now kind of building it across each of the different products. It's just a good way, because I have sort of a baseline of, how does it work on this platform versus how does this new tool unlock capabilities that it couldn't before on the previous one.
And are you keeping the same prompt across, or are you switching that up too?
I switched that up too. Switch that up.
Because one of the things I noticed, the fundamental shift between previous technological shifts versus now, is that previously everything was deterministic.
That's right.
If you're learning a software, you do 3 clicks, it's going to do same thing every single time. No matter who does it, how they do it, when they do it. Now that changes.
That's right.
It flips, based on what instructions you write and how your things are connected, completely different results, which causes such a big gap between people who are leveraging it well versus the ones who are not.
Yes, and as these products are maturing, there's also an abstraction layer that's sort of getting created where, maybe previously you had to be a lot more specific, and then now, more generalized one-shot prompting is able to get you there. But I think the big thing now is just all about context, right? And how do you provide these prompts with more and more context to, make sure they can do exactly what you're trying to get them to do. So it's fun.
Nice. Yeah. And for your own work, what are your top AI use cases that helps you be more productive or solve some of the problems? Yeah,
so I mentioned I talk to Copilot a lot on my runs. It's everything from I'm thinking through a product problem, help me solve it. I'm thinking through an interpersonal dynamics challenge. Let's talk through different ways I could solve this. When I'm thinking about doing performance reviews and my own personal performance review on myself, help me brainstorm. These are the types of bullets that I want to put together. But my team actually has been working on a bunch of different agents within different functions. So within the startups team, they've created an agent where, again, I mentioned sort of enterprise customers are interested in solving specific problems. So they can basically, you write in natural language, what type of problem is an enterprise customer trying to solve? And this agent will come with the startups in our program that are fit for that use case. In our design team, they've created an agent to do what are called heuristic evaluations. So you look at a page and you sort of it takes our design guidelines and it evaluates how well does this page, what scores it. So that's an example there. We also, my team writes all the technical documentation for products at Microsoft. So there's an agent that helps with content maintenance and content quality. So it's been really cool to see my own personal use cases, but then also the team, really getting creative around how do I solve problems in different ways using these agents.
So it's more like a reasoning ability, having it as a soundboard to reference certain documents or previously trained data to just reason over it and give context and feedback, essentially. Okay, so for people who wants to build startups, they're non-technical, but now they can start leveraging vibe coding platforms to get something out there. One of the biggest concerns is security. They're building stuff, the API keys are exposed, they're not familiar with all that jargon. Is there anything Azure is doing for non-technical people who want to build startups that could help them build something that's more robust and something they could actually scale up once they prove the viability of it?
Sure. I think just Azure in general, because it is the cloud for, some of the largest organizations in the world, we have incredible security and governance and compliance, capabilities built in. So I think for any startup starting that in the future thinks they want to sell into a business or into the enterprise, I think just being on Azure itself, along with lots of, bells and whistles and functionality, but just building on Azure from a trust perspective, I think that's one of the most important things you can do. And we all know, right? If you're a scaling startup, startup, migrating clouds is not going to be very high on your priority list. And I think when you walk into that first customer meeting with an enterprise and they ask, what are you built on? I think being able to say Azure gives you kind of that instant credibility. So lots of bells and whistles, but I think just
of course
the core cloud is so secure, and it's we've invested so much in sort of compliance and governance that I think that's sort of like the best place to start.
And then for for the future roadmap, is it something on the roadmap where you're trying to make Azure more accessible for like the vibe coders? Because they're going from like prompt to like building the front end and the back end essentially.
Sure.
But from Azure perspective, for again non-technical people, they feel very scared. It's like super technical and all that stuff.
Sure.
Is there something on the roadmap for that?
Yeah, so we actually here at Ignite launched an agentic Copilot within Azure and 6 agents. So these agents will do basically tasks across your entire cloud management lifecycle. So everything from migrating to deploying resources to optimizing your VMs, optimizing your cost, observability, figure out when there's an incident, troubleshooting when you need help getting a problem solved, resiliency to make sure that your environment's resilient. So we've actually, to your exact point, we've built a bunch of agents in this sort of agentic interface to help, folks who are not familiar with Azure or maybe aren't technical, just use natural language to say, hey, help me figure out how do I save costs on my current, VMs, and then it'll go and reason over your entire Azure, Azure estate, and be able to actually help you understand, how you can reduce your costs, but also reduce your carbon imprint, but also keep your performance up. So I think we're investing a lot in basically making this technology as accessible as possible to anyone who wants to build.
That's cool. I didn't know about that one, so I need to check it with my team to see what we can do. Are you calling it like a dev, Vibe DevOps or something?
It's just Azure Copilot. We're keeping it simple.
Keeping it simple.
We've got M365 Copilot, Security Copilot, Azure Copilot, and GitHub Copilot. So we're sort of in the family of Copilots.
Sounds good. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Annie. It was a lovely conversation.
It was awesome. Really appreciate it.
Of course.